Hi, I'm Julie from ThermoKitchen, and today we're going to be making bread. So as I take you through the bread making process, I'm going to walk you through some of the difficulties that people have with making bread, some of the ingredients that we use, and some of the problems that people have with proofing bread and getting a good loaf. So let's get started. Okay, so we're on manual mode. Now the first step, we are adding our flour. Now I'm using 510 grams of baking flour. Now we're using baking flour and not regular plain flour. And the reason for that is baking flour is a stronger flour and plain flour is a cake flour. And the difference is that the baker's flour is needed to give the loaf structure. So we definitely need to be using the baker's flour for a loaf of bread. Now we are going to add our yeast. So this is 2 teaspoons of yeast. So this is dried instant yeast. Okay, so the yeast is in a dormant state. So now we're going to add a teaspoon of sugar to the yeast. So the sugar is going to be used to feed the yeast. It's going to wake it up. So now we're going to add our water. Now I have warm water in here because the warm water will help wake up the yeast and activate it. So we want 310 grams of warm water. And try not to go over. There we go, 310. Okay, and then I've got some bread improver. So this is bread improver. Now what the bread improver does is it gives the bread a better texture. Now bread improver can be found just in the cake aisle at Woolworths or Coles. Now if you can't find it, you can use a little bit of vinegar, like a teaspoon of vinegar, and that will also condition the flour and give it the same texture. Okay, and now we're adding our salt. We want to add the salt somewhere away from the yeast. So I'm going to put it over on the opposite side to where I put the yeast. So notice I put the yeast in earlier and over the side with the water. So the water and the sugar and the yeast went in over that side, and they've been sitting together. Now I can already see that they're nice and frothy because they've already started to react. The yeast has already started to wake up and it's consuming the sugar and it's letting off carbon dioxide. By putting the salt over here on the flour, the salt hasn't interfered with that at all. Yeast doesn't like salt, so we wouldn't put the salt directly on the yeast. Okay, and now I'm adding 20 grams of oil. So just popping that in. Okay, putting the lid on and Xing out of that. And we're going into our dough function. So tap on dough. And we are putting this on for 2 minutes. Tapping on the wheat symbol and turning that on. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, there we go. So that's our ball of dough. Now, what kneading does is it activates the gluten. So when we're making cake, you might remember that we fold very gently the flour into the cake mixture, and we're trying not to overwork the flour. And the reason for that is because we don't want to activate the gluten in a cake because we'll get a tough cake. Whereas with making bread, we actually do want to activate the gluten. because that's what's going to give the bread structure. Okay, so I'm going to take this dough out. Now, because I used warm water, the dough is actually nice and warm. And if we take a look at this, you can see that the dough is nice and shiny. Now, that's one of the ways that you can tell that the gluten has been activated and that the dough has been kneaded sufficiently. Now, if this dough was sticky and sticking to me, or not holding together properly, then you would put that in for a little bit longer and let it knead for longer. But this dough has come together nicely and is nice and shiny and has been kneaded sufficiently. So what we're going to do now is we have a bowl, and I'm going to pop this dough in the bowl, and we need for it to double in size. Now, it is important that the dough does get the time it needs to double in size. This is a first rise, and during this period is when the yeast gets its time to become fully active, and it produces all its carbon dioxide and aerates the dough. So during this period, it all becomes alive, and then we'll knock it down and we'll make a shape out of it, whether it be a loaf or whether it be rolls. So today is not overly warm, so now I'm going to have to think about how I'm going to warm this dough, because it won't proof very quickly in cold weather. We'll have to wait a long period of time. So you can never actually say how long it's going to take to proof your bread, or how long it's going to take to make a loaf of bread. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cover it with a clean towel, and that's just going to prevent it from getting a skin on top, and it's also going to keep the heat in. Now, I could put this in a greased thermoserver, or I could roll it in a thermomat to keep the heat in, but I'm just going to pop it in this tin, because what I'm going to do is put some warm water in my sink, and I'm going to just pop the tin in the warm water in the sink and let the heat from that disperse around the tin, and that will warm my loaf, my dough. So I'm just going to go and do that, and I'll come back to you when my dough has doubled in size, and we'll go on from there. Okay, so let's take a look. Here we go. So the dough has more than doubled in size. It has taken an hour and a half to get to this stage, but it is a rainy day today. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to put some oil on my hands, just so the dough doesn't stick, and take it out of this bowl. Now, I've got our bread tin here. This bread tin you can get from the mix shop, as can you get the oil spritzer. Okay, we're just going to divide the dough in half. Now, you could measure this to get it exact, but I've never bothered. Now we're going to make 2 dough balls, and we're just curving the ends over and getting a nice flat top, and popping that in the loaf tin. I have actually already greased the loaf tin. So just stretching this under so we get a nice stretchy top. I'm popping this one alongside. Okay, just take a look here. Okay, so this has got a lot of proofing to do. We need the dough to come up to the top of this pan. One thing with dough, Once you put it in the oven, it will not rise any further. Now the reason for this is that the yeast which causes it to rise is a living organism. And once it gets above 30 degrees, the yeast dies. So it will not rise once it goes in the oven. So it needs to do all its proofing outside the oven. So we are going to cover this and we're going to wait until it's reached the top of the tin before we put it in the oven. So I'll let you have a look at that once we get to that point. So in the meantime, I'm going to put this in a nice warm spot and we'll let it rise. Okay, so as you can see, our dough has risen nicely. It's above the tin, so it is actually ready to bake. Now, first of all, I am going to brush the loaf with some water. You can actually spray it if you like as well. And then I'm going to just put some seeds over the loaf, just some sesame seeds. Now the oven has been preheated at 200 degrees. And this is going to go in for about 25 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes. You know when it's ready because you tap on it, and if it sounds hollow, then your bread is ready. So it'll be nice and golden, and tapping on it, you'll hear a hollow sound. So ready to go in the oven, and then we'll see what it looks like when it's all done. Okay, here we are. Sounds nice and hollow. Just nope. Gonna need a knife to go around that. Just loosen the edges a little bit. That's looking better. Okay. Lovely. And one loaf of bread. Now, just so you know, the second proof, that's the proof that was done in the actual loaf tin, that one took 2.5 hours. So it's been a really rainy day here and no nice temperature at all. So it took 2.5 hours with the tin in a warm sink of water. So proofing can take quite a while. We do have to be patient. But that's the finished result. One delicious loaf of bread. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and don't forget to join me on our ThermoKitchen Facebook group. Happy cooking!